to attendees and all the members. So members, today's meeting theme is based on how to read and how to analyze the judgments under the Income Tax Act and GST Acts. So normally majority of chartered accountants are mostly into the compliance based of both these two laws. But the next level comes is how to analyze a judgment, how to come to a conclusion from a judgment, and how to use that judgment during litigation. So to explain this in brief and detail, today we are having Advocate CA Bharat Agarwal ji, a very learned faculty. And sir, we are privileged and honored that you are here on this beautiful Sunday morning. So sir, thank you very much. And so before proceeding with the today's webinar, I have certain announcement to make that our next meeting will be held next Sunday. And and the topic of the next meeting is accounting standards which are applicable to non-corporate entities, and that meeting will be taken over by CA Chintan Patel from Ahmedabad. And another request, if members and attendees have any questions, please post your queries in the chat box. So Bharat Agarwal ji will take all your queries at the end.
दीपक को क्या हो गया?
Now I request okay, sorry. So there is some technical issue at my end. Okay. So now I request CA Nikhil Porwal ji, the guru of Bharat Agarwal ji, to kindly introduce Bharat Agarwal ji.
No. Thank you, Deepak. It's an honor to introduce Bharat. We have done our articleship together. He was my junior in SB Billamoria. And we've had some great memories of spending articleship time apart from doing audit. So I will be happy to introduce him. He qualified as a chartered accountant in 1997. He's a winner of the Kinlow Forbes Gold Medal in Law from Mumbai University in 2010. He practiced as a CA for more than a decade, handling tax disputes and tax planning. He acquired his sanad from Bar Council in his law firm Ace Legal in 2012, which specializes in real estate dealing structures for real estate developers with focus on tax planning. The firm also handles tax litigation in various forums, including Mumbai High Court, Supreme Court. And Bharat has structured many large deals and documentations using his expertise as a CA as well as a lawyer. He leads a team of professionals, which includes chartered accountants and lawyers, and has authored 2 books, one on Prevention of Money Laundering Act and the other on service tax. He is ably assisted by his wife, who is also a CA and an advocate, Advocate Ritika Agarwal, as a partner in Ace Legal and who heads the litigation side. Bharat has more than 23 years of experience in handling real estate laws, and he has been advising BANM, CREDAI, MCHI, and youth. And he's empaneled with the LIC HF AMC for advising on funding of real estate deals. So anybody wanting any funding for their builders, you know whom to contact. He has been speaking on a number of forums on various topics of law and taxation, and has a long list of articles published in various tax magazines and tax portals covering a gamut of issues. And he's an avid sports fan, which is not mentioned in the CV, which I said. So here's to you, Bharat. Go ahead, and it will be a great honor to listen to you once again.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. And I hope I am audible enough to start with the technology issues.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, great. So Deepak ji, thank you for contacting me, inviting me. It's like, coming back home when I addressing chartered accountants. It's really something which I lap up to if CAs ever call me for any interaction. So I was very happy to receive your call, and I immediately, that's why I accepted that whatever it may be, CAs are first love. And the added icing on the cake was obviously Nikhil. He has been more than a friend to me. To tell the audience here that I learned my basic training was under Nikhil when I started my articleship. I was a very clumsy, underconfident lad coming straight out of college, knowing nothing about either CA and not knowing what to do in life. And he has been a mentor to me. I mean, not only from a technical perspective, but he taught me how to read Economic Times. I still remember, he used to force me to read Economic Times every morning, and also to see the stock market page. So I must give credit, and it's the first time I'm getting this public forum to publicly mention the contribution of Nikhil in my life. So I think I took this opportunity for that purpose. Now, coming to the topic today, it's a topic which I've been addressing law students in various law colleges, also addressing professionals at various stages. So this topic is quite close to my heart. And the reason why this topic is important and interesting nowadays is because of a university called WhatsApp University, which we all are very well aware of. The kind of WhatsApps we get as a summary of judgments or summary of decision taken by some court. Unfortunately, most of the times we realize that either the reporting is wrong or the ratio is wrong, and it leads to some wrong advice being rendered to the professionals by the professionals to their clients without understanding truly the real implication of that judgment or the facts of that judgment. So with this short introduction, I would take this in two broad steps. First is I will just run you through a PowerPoint presentation which is purely academic in nature. I will take you through what exactly is the academic part of reading a judgment is, what are the various parts of a judgment. And then in the next part, I will take up two actual recent judgments of tribunal, income tax tribunal, and we will go through it and see how those parts are mentioned in that particular judgment. That will brief you on the issue of those judgments, since they are latest and very, very relevant today. They are 2021 judgments. And also, it will explain you how to read a case law. So both the parts will be addressed when we take the actual case study. So first 1 hour I'll devote to the PPT, and the next 40 minutes or odd I will devote to two judgments which we will go through together, where I'll explain you the various parts. And thereafter we are open for any questionnaire which I'll receive on the text messages or otherwise. So I would request with me is my colleague CS Sneha Sarbhushan, who's going to run the PPT for us, as she has prepared the PPT based upon whatever we've been doing in the past. So I request Sneha to kindly share the screen so that we all can benefit from the PPT.
Sir, please ask Deepak. Now I've been messaging Aditya ji. I am not able to share the screen as I'm a.
So when we are reading a particular judgment, like a human body has various parts, even a judgment has various parts. So very obviously, when it's a judgment, that means there are two warring sides. So there is going to be an appellant and there is going to be a respondent. Then there is going to be a judge. So there are three people who are involved in a particular matter. And if I take the tax, then it's in tax, it's an SSC department and the judges, whether it's high court or tribunal members or whatever. So these are the three people who are involved in a particular judgment. All three speak through the judgment. So there is something what the SSC submits or the appellant submits. There is something what the department submits. And then finally, what the judge speaks through the order. So all the three parties will speak in a judgment. Now, a judgment, as I said, has various parts. So the various parts are like, what are the issues involved in a case? What are the arguments of one party, arguments of second party? What are the case laws they have relied upon? What are the circulars they have relied upon? What are the sections they have relied upon? Thereafter, the judge collects all this, take a call on whatever his view is, and then he passes a verdict. But that verdict itself is not a judgment. The judgment is the reasoning which drives him to a particular verdict. So if he says that such and such action of the assessing officer in making an addition under section 68, unexplained cash credit, was incorrect, then that is not the judgment. The judgment is why it was incorrect. So suppose he gives a reason saying that opportunity of hearing was not given, or cross-examination was not given to the SSC, or XYZ, then that reasoning becomes the most important part of the judgment. Normally what happens is when we receive WhatsApp messages of a particular judgment that this court held so and so, invariably we have seen that it misses out on the soul or the crux of the judgment, and we tend to apply those judgments as a precedence in whatever cases we have, or we start forming opinion on that basis. I think that's something where we have to be very wary about, because every judgment has its own set of facts. Unless we know the facts correctly, the judgment we cannot understand, because each judgment is based on that particular fact. And if that fact changes, the judgment will change. So you will feel that that you have different types of judgments coming in, and some court is saying something else, some court is saying something else. It's normally because the facts are different. There is no dispute on the law laid down, but maybe the facts were different, so the judgment also came different. So when we are really working on that, while reading a judgment, this is something which we have to be careful of. Now, before we start with the PPT, there's one more thing as a professional which I would like to address. That most of us have been into compliance practices and handling compliances. Now, reading a judgment is something which will be initially a very difficult task for most of the people who have over the years done compliance practice. However, I can assure you, and I'm saying it with my personal experience, that if you devote 7 consecutive days in reading, say, just 2 judgments a day, what will happen is that by the 8th day, you will feel extremely comfortable reading a judgment. Now, when I say reading a judgment, I mean reading a judgment from top to bottom. So if you really want to learn and know how to read a judgment, it's an absolutely practical thing. It's not something which can be taught in theory. So it's like driving a car. You can't learn it in theory. You have to actually drive a car. You want to learn swimming, you have to actually jump in the water. So it's something like that. So pick up a couple of judgments every day, go through them, leave it, forget it, no problem. You do it for 7 days. By 8th day, you will feel extremely comfortable. And by the 21st day, you will take just 5 minutes in scanning through a judgment, and that will become such a second nature to you that you will not feel at all that, okay, you're reading a long judgment, spending just 5-10 minutes and just getting the crux of the judgment, understanding the true nuances and how to apply it. That's one thing. Second thing is, what are the advantages which reading a judgment gives you? The first thing is it teaches you truly a legal English. Now, legal English is something which is so very important for a professional to know, learn, speak, write. It really puts you with a lot of words which are very commonly used in courts or by good lawyers, and you tend to become extremely comfortable with those words. So that is something which is really very interesting, that you learn legal English. So whenever you are making submissions, now with a faceless era coming in, whether you're making submission to the AO or to the first appellate authority, the writing automatically improves. Somewhere in the subconscious, you have read certain language of the judges that becomes part of your vocabulary. And when you're writing, dictating, you're using the same very language. It enhances your submission to another level. So that is something very important. The other thing it does is it makes you realize how the court thinks on a particular issue, or how the court thinks generally about a certain situation. So you tend to come out of the hangover of an assessing officer who has his own way and reasons for interpreting or talking in a particular manner, and you move towards what and how the law is actually applied and implemented in various higher forums where law takes precedence over anything else. So then you tend to learn and you understand that, oh, okay, the AO may not agree to you, but this is what the law is, and this is, I know how the courts will react to this situation. So in a lot of situations, your power to handle situation before the assessing officer or before the various forums increase with that confidence. So these are, the broad intangible benefits which you will learn if you're consistently reading judgments. The third aspect which you will learn is that in so many cases, the higher forums depend upon the evidence which has been led before the lower authorities. So when you are reading the judgments, you realize that it is so important to place your evidence in a very proper manner before the assessing officer itself, that at an assessment stage itself. And while handling a show cause notice or an issue, you will immediately know that, okay, if this issue travels to the appellate authority, then what all evidence I need to place today before the assessing officer, even if it's a faceless assessment, you have to have a proper record for handling the matter at a higher level. If that show cause notice is not agreed, if that your submission is not agreed to by the AO. So you'll exactly know that, okay, I've been able to place everything on record. Even if the AO doesn't agree, I know the appellate authority based upon these relevant facts will be able to play it out. So that is something which all these advantages are there, which while reading a judgment on a regular basis will add to your already equipped potentials. This will add a new aspect to your personality as a professional. Sneha, you've been able to connect now? Sneha? Yes, Sneha. Okay, okay. 1 second. Deepak ji? Deepak ji, can you make Swapnil as a co-host?
Yeah,
Sneha is changed. Sneha is changed to Aditya ji. Sneha is changed to Swapnil laptop. So if you can just connect to that.
Aditya,
I'm
Swapnil.
seeing option only of Sneha only. I've made her the
Swapnil Sarbhushan.
No, Sneha.
Sneha Sarbhushan. Yeah. Sneha Sarbhushan. Yeah. You got it now, Sneha? Yeah. Okay. She's got it. She's playing that. She's playing it now.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So whatever I have just spoken about it, the PPT more or less captures everything. So what we'll do is that once the PPT begins, I will share that PPT with the coordinate people also here who are managing this. And apart from that, yes, I put it as a, yeah, just go to the next slide. Okay, to start with, I'll give you an example. What happened was that this was a particular WhatsApp which we received. It is not a tax case, but it is just going to give you a reason why we at all need to read actual case law. Now, this was a report on a WhatsApp university. Well, I call it as a WhatsApp university only because WhatsApp teaches us a lot. So the WhatsApp reported that Supreme Court has rejected the plea of tenants for waiver of rent. This is during the first wave of COVID, when there were a lot of issues about whether the rent can be charged during this period. Now, it was reported that Supreme Court has said that meaning the payment of rent cannot be refused and it is mandatory for the tenant for any property that they occupy. The order was passed on the plea of lawyers requesting to waive off the rent of their chambers during lockdown, which was rejected by the court and is applicable to all properties, whether residential, industrial, or commercial. Now, this was the report which came on WhatsApp saying that Supreme Court has passed an order saying refusing the plea of lawyers that rent should be waived. They have refused, and they have further held that rent is mandatory and whether it is residential, industrial, commercial. Now, this is what was the WhatsApp university stating. Now, what was the actual case? Now, this was the actual decision of the court, which was turned and twisted in a totally different manner on WhatsApp. So this is just an example. Now here, what was the actual situation? It said senior advocate Kailash Vazde for Supreme Court contended, we are not saying that rent for lawyer chamber should not be charged. It should not be made a ground for eviction. Now this was the case where the lawyers were saying we are not asking for waiver of rent. We are asking that only eviction should not be done. And what did the court say? We are not going to enter into this issue. You are not entitled to any special consideration. That's all. However, this was reported in a very different manner by saying that the lawyers are asking for rent waiver and the Supreme Court has held that rent is mandatory in residential, industrial, commercial premises. Nothing like that happened. Now, this is why reading the actual decision is so very important before you base your opinion on anything. And I don't know how many people must have gone by this WhatsApp message circulating and taken a decision of, sending notices to their tenants or whatever, or maybe people advising. So this is the problem which happens when you're not reading the actual judgment. Next slide, Sneha, please. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just quickly go through what is a case law, what is the anatomy of a case law. As I said, anatomy means the parts of the case law, how to analyze it, and last we will cover 2 actual examples. Okay, now when we are reading any law, whether it is GST or income tax, we have to understand that it emanates from basically 3 important parts. One is the statutory provisions, like we may say Income Tax Act rules and regulations. The other are the notification and circulars which are issued by CBDT. And then there are judicial pronouncements or the judgments, which is the subject matter of our discussion today, which constitutes a very large part of source of law. So there is an Income Tax Act which is existing in the statute books which we buy every year and which we read as a section, and the circulars and notifications issued by CBDT. But that's only 50% of it, because there is a lot of judge-made law under Income Tax Act, which you can call it as a separate act in itself. The 2 cases which we will discuss today will clearly highlight how judges make law which is going beyond the specific language of the statutory act. So that will give you a very good idea that whenever you are reading or advising on an issue, you need to know how judges think about it so that you can advise properly. Next slides there. Okay, so what is a case law? It is a judgment that establishes a principle or a rule of law. When we go through our case studies today, you will understand what is the principle or rule of law laid down by the judge. It can be based upon statutory provisions like interpretation of any section or rule, or it can also cite any earlier judgment based upon which it will be deciding. One of the case studies is based upon judicial decision or a precedent, which we will discuss today, and it can be used as a future reference. And these precedents, these are the judgments, are normally used by lawyers or court or other judicial bodies which decide later case with similar issues or facts. So which are known as precedents or stare decisis. Next, Sneha. Okay, now these are the various parts of a judgment, and they go sequentially. More or less it goes sequentially, but each judge has its own way of writing a judgment. Broadly, these are the various parts of a judgment. So there is a facts of the case. Then issue means the question before the court, what it has to decide. That is the issue. Argument of the parties, both the parties lay down whatever they have to say. Then there is a judgment. Now judgment itself has 2 parts. Judgment says what is decided and why it is decided. So judgment has 2 parts, what and why. So we have to be very careful that we have to read both. And the most important part in any judgment is the why. What is okay, but why is very important. And that is where most of the people make error. Most of the professionals make error when citing the judgments at the bar or at the tribunal or anywhere. So we have to know the reasoning part of it very well to understand why it is. And reasoning in itself is in fact connected with the first step here, that is the fact of the case. As we go ahead, we'll understand that. Next. So each judgment has a title. Now the title contains the name of the court, the number of the case, and the parties to the dispute. Now, as we say that, ITA number so and so, that is the number of the case. It's before Mumbai Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. Parties could be that either department could be in appeal or an SSE could be in appeal, and so they are parties to the list. Next, yeah. How do you cite a case law? I don't need to really teach this. Most of you are professionals, so you know that when we write, so we mention ITR so and so. Here I would like to make a specific mention, which most of us miss, is that we don't write the year of rendering of that judgment. Earlier it was not really very important, but now of late, due to large number of amendments under the income tax laws, it's very, very essential, especially GST, with so much of notifications, amendments coming in every day, that we mention the year of the judgment. That is because from that year, a judge or the opposite party is able to determine whether that judgment is still relevant today or it was based on an earlier law which stands repealed. So the year of the judgment is something which we must write wherever possible, and make an attempt to write it. So if you're quoting a judgment of 1970s or 1980s, invariably try to find where it has been followed in 2020, 2019, 2021. So, that will bring the recent relevancy of that particular judgment. So try to be as latest as possible so as to make out a good case for your client. Next point. Now, within a case law, when you're reading a case law, you will go through so many words and so many sentences which are really not relevant. What is important is that out of large number of things said, what is relevant and what is not relevant. So the relevant facts, although Indian Evidence Act specifically defines relevant facts, irrelevant facts, but I'm not going into that technicality. Simply put, relevant facts are those facts which form the basis of the judgment of the judge. You change anything in a relevant fact, the judgment can change. Irrelevant facts are those facts which really doesn't matter whether it is this way or that way. It really doesn't matter. When we discuss the two case studies, I will give you the clear example what is relevant and what is not relevant. So remember, in every time you read a case law and you want to apply it to your set of your client's case, try to cull out or try to take out those particular facts which are relevant and try to match it with your client's case. So if the relevant facts match, you have a very good case on your hand. If the facts are matching with your client's case, and the judges will take it up immediately. So try to do this exercise of matching the facts of the case which you are citing with the facts of the case which is in your hand. That is something which is a very important exercise. Next. So these are the various things which you will find in the judgment. What is the nature of dispute? So if I talk about Income Tax Act, it could be a disallowance of expense. It could be unexplained cash credit. It could be disallowance of a claim under Chapter 6. It could be anything. So what is the nature of dispute? That is one thing. Parties, who sued whom based on what occurrences. Now, till CIT appeal level, it's only the SSE. But when we travel to tribunal or a Supreme Court, High Court, it is quite possible that the department is an appellant and the SSE is a respondent. So who is in appeal will make a very big difference when you are reading a judgment or understanding a case law. History of the case is, say if the matter is in High Court, then you should know what happened at tribunal, what happened at CIT appeal level, what happened at AO level. So the lower courts or the lower forums, what each has held and why it has held is something which is always mentioned in the judgment. And that is also very important to read to understand how the case has traveled over the period of time. Next. Okay, now we take the first part of a judgment. Whenever you are reading a judgment, you have to first understand what that judgment is on. Why are you reading it at all? So if someone says, oh, this is a judgment on penny stock and the tribunal has granted full relief to the SSE, it's a penny stock case. So the immediate thing which will come in your mind is, okay, तो इसमें जो issue था वो ये था कि penny stock का AO ने नहीं माना capital gain or capital loss whatsoever. So this is the issue. So this is something which will immediately strike you even before you start reading the judgment. Normally, there are head notes which is published by various people, or somewhere you'll pick up a judgment, you'll know that you're reading a judgment on this particular issue. So issue is the most important part when you start with a judgment, that what are you reading it for? Question kya hai jiska answer milna hai? It's like when you're sitting for an exam, the question paper in your hand. So issues, if you look at the right hand side, it says it's always in a question form. So the judge will always say in the judgment, the issue before us is whether the AO was right in treating the capital gain as bogus, since it's a penny stock. So it could be that way drafted or mentioned in the judgment. So that is it's always in a question form. There can be one or more issues. So there can be, if there are 4 grounds of appeal, 4 different editions made by the AO, so there can be 4 issues. So there can be 4 questions, each having a separate, each issue separately mentioned. So if you look at the grounds of appeal, and normally I have seen a trend in tribunal that tribunal tends to reproduce the grounds of appeal of the department or of the SSE. So from there you can make out, okay, how many issues are involved, what all issues are addressed in this particular case. Then those issues can emerge out of various things. So those issues can emerge out of interpretation of law. So there could be a judgment which is basically saying that whether the claim under Chapter 6A has been rightly provided, looking at that it is a beneficial provision, or whether it is, or it could be that whether this provision is a directory provision or mandatory. If I have not submitted the audit report, whether it leads to disallowance of my claim. So these are the questions which are of interpretation of law. So the issue can emerge out of interpretation of law or of facts or this. Then no issue is in isolation of relevant facts. So what this means is that the facts are very important to determine that issue in that particular judgment. So if I am saying that this is a penny stock case, now the first fact is whether it's a penny stock capital gain or whether it's a penny stock capital loss which I have claimed. So that's a very relevant fact. Second is whether there is a SEBI report against this, or whether there is no SEBI report, or there was just an investigation report. So these are relevant facts which will change the precedence of another judgment to your case. And applicability of precedence. So the issues emerge from you cite a particular judgment saying that I am covered by so and so judgment. The department says no, this judgment is not applicable to you. On the other hand, department comes with a judgment saying that this is applicable to you. Hence, an issue has emerged whether which judgment to apply. So these are the various facets of an issue, which when you're reading a judgment should keep in mind that why that issue has emerged. What is the reason for emergence of that issue? So this is something which is the first part of it. Next, Sneha. I have already explained this. It's in written form. So when I share this, you can just go through it. I've already explained this. Next. Then the next part is the argument by the party. So there could be a appellant, there could be a respondent. And as I said that the arguing party will place that the facts are disputed or undisputed. So till tribunal, the facts are to be determined by the tribunal. Beyond tribunal, High Court doesn't get into facts, it only gets into question of law. So if there are disputed facts, then those have to be brought in earlier and primarily. So each party will present its side of facts. The other party will say, no, these facts are incorrect or correct. So that is first is whether there is a dispute on the facts or not. Second is the proposition of law. So a party will say that this particular law is applicable. The other will say, no, this is applicable. Third is the precedent cited. As I earlier explained, one party will rely on one judgment, the other will rely on another judgment. And the last and the most important is that you may rely, as a SSC may rely upon a particular section. The department may rely on a totally different section to say, no, it's not this section, but this section which is applicable. So these are the arguments of the parties, which basically cover the facts, the law, the case laws earlier relied upon, and the statutory provisions, rules, circulars, whatever. So these are the points that are covered. Now, judgment, as I said, that it's a decision of the court, which explains in detail what are the which answers the question which is placed before it. So when I said that issue is raised, and the issue raised is a question. So if a question raised is whether this particular gain was a no, Sneha, go to the next slide. So whether this was a penny stock and this gain is bogus or not. So the judgment will decide that and lay down that yes, it is confirmed it is a bogus capital gain or loss, or it will say no, this is that the department has failed to bring anything adverse on record, so this is genuine. So the judgment will first decide what is the question before it. It will say yes or no, and normally it is mentioned in very short sentences by the judge that yes, I agree, yes, we don't agree, whatever, we are inclined to agree with the SSC, we are inclined to agree with the department. So these are the short sentences. So that's known as the decision. That's the final decision, or that's the answer to the question before it. The other part on the right hand side, if you see, is the reasoning or the rationale for arriving at that particular yes or no. So the judgment doesn't just say that no, we do not agree and this is right. That will be treated as an arbitrary order. So what the judge has to do, he has to pass a speaking order. So speaking order means giving reasons why he agrees to one party, why he doesn't agree to one party. What are the various reasons? So it could be law, it could be precedents, it could be sections, it could be opinion. So those are the reasonings which are important. And I am repeating myself when I'm saying this. Whenever you're reading a judgment, at the back of the mind, although all parts are important, but at the back of the mind, remember, you have to reach the reasoning fast. It's the reasoning which will stay with you forever. It's the reasoning which will become the precedent. It's the reasoning which will make you an extremely good orator before the court. And it's the reasoning which will give you the skill of making submissions. Next slides there. Okay, then I'm just skipping this because it's not something very important from our tax point of view. So you can skip this slide. Okay, now we come to how to analyze a case law. So first thing is, if you see the table straight away, so I've just taken an example that, okay, how do you identify the parties? Who's the appellant before the particular forum? So before the CIT appeal, it's always the assessee, and the respondent is always the AO. But as you go to ITAT, and if the assessee has won before CIT appeal, then the AO will become the appellant, and the the assessee will become the respondent. But suppose and AO wins in the tribunal, then again the parties change. The assessee goes to High Court, then assessee becomes the appellant, and the respondent is AO. So first is determining, when you're reading the judgment, who went to the court. Next. Okay. So you can read this at your leisure. I've given you the broad this thing, but I'll just explain in very simple language that whenever you are analyzing a judgment, isolate the relevant facts. So you mark out which are the which part of the judgment is which part of the facts are relevant for your issue, which are not relevant. So first is cull out or take out, scoop out the relevant facts. Then is determine the legal issues raised, which you will invariably get it in the form of a question in a very easy manner. So this is not something which will take too much of an effort. And phrase the issue in your mind in a yes or no, so that when you're reading the judgment, you know what you are hunting for or what you're looking for. So when you do these three things as you're reading the judgment, the analysis becomes extremely simple. Right now, it may be sounding to you very technical or very confusing or very hard. Believe me, it's very simple, very, very simple. Just put it to practice for 7 days and you'll be the master of the game by the 8th day. Next. Yeah. So, these are the steps which I normally do, that whatever the legal rule has been placed down, I try to see, okay, whether I have separated the issues properly, what is the act or law applied, what is the judgment which has not been applied, what is the judgment which has been distinguished. So all this is given in this. So you can continue to, when you read it, just keep these in mind. And if one fact changes, whether the rule itself will change. That when we see the case studies, we'll understand everything more clearly. Next, Sneha. So this is what we do normally when a precedence is applied, and if the same issue has been decided by an earlier court, you can just read that earlier judgment to understand that what was the reasoning applied, and you can use that reasoning in your case, and then probably tell the judge that, okay, see, based on this reasoning is already decided and agreed by an earlier court, and you are relying upon that. So that is how a precedence is established. So the reasoning again comes into picture. The judge, when it's writing its order, it will usually write these words in bold, which I have written, that the rule we applies, or we decide by applying so-and-so judgment, or the applying so-and-so rule. So this is where they are following a precedence. And one of the cases which will be discussed today by a Bombay tribunal very clearly mentions this in a very succinct manner. And when we go through it, you'll understand that. Next point. Okay, so both the parties are putting their side of story, and while reading the judgment, you have this image in front of you that, okay, assessee is saying this, department is saying this, and both the parties are giving their analogies, their judgments, their sections which they are knowing. And when you are reading a judgment, you should know, okay, what in the past the courts have held in similar cases. So even while reading it, you'll know very, fairly that, okay, this would be roughly the answer for this particular issue before the court. Next. So while reading the judgment, when the court is writing its order, so as I said, the last part of it, that's the reasoning part of it. So the court will always say that we have heard both sides and we are inclined to agree with the assessee for the following reasons. That's the normal language used by the judges. Now, from there starts the real stuff which you must master, and that is what is the reasoning. And while reading the reasoning, you will understand that which particular fact of the SSC's case has been used by the judge to arrive at a particular reasoning. So the fact which has been used by the judge to arrive at the reasoning is the most relevant fact, and try to make your case as a precedence by matching those facts, so that your if the facts match, the reasoning also is the same. So highlight the fact the court found most important while giving their reasonings, and try to see that, okay, if this fact was changed, then whether the law which is laid down by judge will change or not change. So in your mind, you're analyzing that, okay, if this was not there, then probably this decision would be different. So let's take an example. Say if it's a claim of section 54, capital gain invest kiya hai, late return file kiya, 139(4) mein kiya instead of 139(1). Now, in your facts of the in the precedents which you are relying upon, or the judgment you are reading, suppose the judge has observed as a fact that the assessee had deposited the entire capital gain, or bought a new flat, or made the payment before filing the late return, before the due date of late return, then this benefit is allowable. Now that was the, suppose that was the reason, that was a fact on which that order was paid, was reasoned out, and the order was passed in favor of SSC. But in your set of facts, you realize that your client has made the payment after the due date of even the belated return, 139. So then what happens? You cannot apply the same judgment because the facts have changed. So the reasoning could change, and your case, your client's case may be weaker than the case which you are relying upon. So when you're analyzing it, look at the fact of the case on which the judge has placed the reliance on. So this is something which is very important. I hope I'm not going too fast to explain the reasons. If there is any issue, please text me on this thing if I'm going too fast or too slow, or if it's making complicated or anything like that. So at least I'll know that I'm not speaking only to a screen, but live people. That's also one of the reasons. Okay. So just to explain that again, that if the fact changes, then the law may change or the judgment may change. So try to match the facts, which the facts which has been used by the judge while giving the reasons. Next slide, Sneha. Okay, now this is something which I've, one of my favorite part of a judgment, which I use so often while arguing in the court or while making submissions, and the courts have laid down, the Supreme Court in this case has laid down how a judgment is to be treated or read. Now, it's something which I'll read slowly so that everybody can understand. It's something extremely important. It says that it is neither desirable nor permissible to pick out a word or a sentence from the judgment of this court, divorced from the context of the question, that is the issue under consideration, and treat it to be complete law declared by the court. So what Supreme Court is saying, that you can't just pick up any judgment and say, oh, this is a judgment and this is now the law of the land. It is to be seen from the thank you for the message. I am more encouraged to speak a little more. Okay, so what Supreme Court has said is that you have to read our judgment, that is Supreme Court's judgment, in the context in which the issue was there. You cannot read it devoid or divorced from that particular issue. Now, one thing which I really liked here was the way Supreme Court has used the word divorced. So, this adds so much of flair to the English writing and legal writing. I mean, normally we don't use the word divorced from the context of the question. We would say, divorce or devoid or whatever. But so something very beautiful writing English coming from Supreme Court. So it says divorced from the context of the question under consideration and treat it to be complete law. The judgment must be read as a whole, not in parts. Now, this is where WhatsApp universities should be severely criticized, that they are just totally doing opposite of what Supreme Court says. Judgment must be read as a whole, and the observations from the judgment have to be considered in the light of questions which were before this court, not something else. I mean, you may read it in some other context. No, what was the question? Only that is answered. A decision of the court takes its color from the question involved in the case in which it is rendered, and while applying the decision to a later case, the court must carefully try to ascertain the true principle laid down by the decision and not to pick out words or sentences from the judgment divorced from the context of the questions under consideration to support their reasoning. Now, I think this judgment is the soul of how you read and cite a citation. I mean, how you cite a precedence. This is an absolute marvelous dicta laid down by the Supreme Court, which you must really follow and keep it in your mind, that read it in the context of the issue before the court and not divorced or divorced that. Next slide, Sneha. Okay, now this is something ratio decided. Now, we keep reading from lawyer's mouth. We keep reading it so many times. What is the ratio? What is the ratio? What is the ratio decided? So I have just mentioned, very loosely mentioning what ratio is. So ratio is the reason, again, the word reason which I've been using. The Latin maxim to that is ratio decided. So you can just use the more simpler language of reasoning. So the reason to arrive at a particular verdict or the answer is the ratio, and that ratio is the soul of a judge. So while reading it, try and highlight and zero onto the ratio. As we go into the case studies, you will understand it a little more. Next slide, Sneha. What is an obiter dicta? Obiter dicta is something, a passing reference of something which was not the issue before the court, but the court either suo moto on its own or at the prodding of one of the parties has mentioned something which is not before the court as a normal issue in the this thing. The Bombay Tribunal case which I have taken today for a case study mentions an obiter dicta, and I will explain you what that, I will show you what that obiter dicta is, so you know how obiter dicta is to be distinguished from the reasoning. And why this is important is because ratio is a binding precedence. It is, if Bombay Tribunal has rendered a judgment, then it's a jurisdictional tribunal. It is binding on authorities. Bombay High Court gives a reasoning. It is binding on authorities. Supreme Court reasoning is binding on all authorities under the in the entire of country under Article 141 of Constitution. So reasoning is binding. Obiter dicta is not binding. It is not a precedence. So you cannot rely on an obiter dicta before the court saying that in that court had in obiter dicta said this, so this is applicable. They'll say this was a passing reference, it was not argued. So therefore, we will not really take it as a binding precedence. So obiter dicta cannot be used as a binding precedence. I will show you in a judgment what obiter dicta is. These words are Latin maxims, so it sounds very difficult, but it's something very simple. This is just a legal this thing that whether obiter dicta is binding or not. So Supreme Court ka obiter dicta bhi binding hai, but lower courts ka obiter dicta binding nahi. Next, Sneha. Yeah, so this is you can just, for further study if you want, you can just read. I've just mentioned that where obiter dicta has been dealt with. Next. Okay, now this is a term on all fours. On all fours means if the facts of your case is exactly similar to the case which you are citing, the precedents you are citing, that is known as on all fours. So we say that my case is on all fours with the earlier judgment. So it's basically where the facts are similar, we say that even the judgment should be similar. So that's what on all four means. The Mumbai ITAT judgment which we are going to take today will is a 2021 January judgment and of Mumbai ITAT written by the Vice President of Tribunal, Mr. Pramod Kumar, one of my favorite judges. Once you read the judgment, you will know that most of the cases will be on all fours after that judgment. Second is the stare decisis. Stare decisis simply means the precedence. It means the past precedence, and stare decisis means it's a binding on you. So you have to basically rely on that. That's what stare decisis means. It's again a Latin word. Next. Next. Okay. Now, when you're reading a judgment, you will come across these various terms. The court has relied upon so-and-so judgment, or the court approves so-and-so judgment, or disapproves, or dissenting. So I have just penned down these words so as to make you comfortable with the language of law or the language of judgment. Once you are comfortable with this, you know exactly what it means. So relied upon is not the same as approved, and disapprove and dissenting is not the same. So why they are different, I am not going into the higher technicality of it. It's not really relevant for today's discussion, but I've still covered it so as to give you a thought process. If somebody is really passionate about law like me, whose second love is law, I will not say first love, then in that case, they can definitely go deeper into it and understand the nuances of this. Next. Okay, so that was the last slide. As far as the PPT is concerned, now I think I've taken the basics of the judgment. What are the parts, how to analyze it, what is reasoning, stare decisis, obiter dicta. What I'll do is now that I will also now cover the two judgments. First, I will take is the Mumbai ITAT decision I'll take later on. First I will take in is the Delhi ITAT judgment, which is extremely important for people who are handling scrutinies. It's a 2020 judgment, which is very well reasoned out and very well fought by both parties, including department. So what I'll do is I'll open the actual text of the judgment and we'll go through it slowly. We still have an hour to go. And what we'll do is we'll slowly go through it. I will keep explaining you the various parts of that judgment. And by the end of it, you will not only know the parts of the judgment, you will know the reasoning, and you will also know what is that judgment deciding for your future knowledge, for your future use. So Sneha, let's play the Delhi ITAT judgment first. Is it possible to enlarge this, Sneha, so that then everybody can view it properly? Acha, you can't do away with the left-hand side screen. Yeah, this one. If you can just do away with that. It's not really needed. And so this is a judgment. This is a decision by the Delhi bench of ITAT, and this was an extremely interesting case, which basically raised an issue which we all had in our mind, and we didn't know how to go about challenging it. So this is something which is an extremely interesting scrutiny case where a technical ground was raised and how the courts dealt with it. So as we discussed the parts of the judgment, so it mentions before the bench, that is the New Delhi bench of ITAT, the judge's name, the ITA numbers, and here it says appellant versus respondent. So it's Dev Milk Foods is the appellant, that's a party, and additional CIT respondent. So here only we know that the assessee has lost at CIT appeal level also. So this is the second appeal by the assessee having lost at CIT appeal level. So at this stage itself, we can understand that. Next page, yeah, go down. So what we'll do is that we'll go through it. So what, just go to the highlighted portion. So what I do here is when I am preparing, when I am reading a case, I have this tendency of using PDF. There are a lot of softwares which you can use, PDF Element or anything else. And I keep highlighting in my own fashion. You can develop your own fashion. There is no one way of doing it, where I highlight the relevant portions. And I have, I keep annotating the various parts of it just for my future reference. So when I'm using it as a precedence elsewhere, I know exactly what point or what para to read out to the judge or to what to call out and reproduce in a submission. And it becomes a future treasure for me to, quickly refer it. So here what I've done is I've indulged a bit and I've gone a step forward because it's a tutorial. From a teaching perspective, I have highlighted a little more than what I usually do because I needed to highlight the various parts of a judgment. And I have also in red font mentioned my notings just to explain the various parts, which I normally don't do in whatever I am doing. But you can evolve your own method of reading and making notes or highlighting or reading. So here, since it's a tutorial, it's a little more highlighted. So if you see para 2.1, I have skipped the earlier part. It was not relevant because it mentioned here return file UA. I have straight away come to what was the fact before the AO. So the fact was in the assessment order, I'll read out the assessing officer noted that the SSC's case was selected for limited scrutiny with respect to long-term capital gain. But it was noticed that SSC had claimed a short-term capital loss of 4 crore 20 lakh, which had been adjusted against long-term capital gain. Then the next highlighted portion is loss could possibly have been created to reduce incidence of tax on long-term capital gain shown by SSC. The next line it says, go down, scroll please. Approval of learned principal commissioner of income tax was taken to convert the case from limited to complete scrutiny, and the SSC was also intimated about the change in status of SSC. So when I read these highlighted facts, certain things come in my mind. First is, okay, so this was a conversion of a limited scrutiny to a complete scrutiny. Secondly, it was a case where the assessing officer has probably not disallowed the long-term capital loss of 4.2 crores because of some reasons. Now, as we go ahead, we will understand what exactly happened. So these are the basic facts. I'm skipping all that. I'm coming straight to 2.2. And it says the AO went on to hold that the purchase of share did not take place and transactions were sham in view of documentary evidence, circumstantial evidence, human conduct and preponderance of probability. AO observed that the entire exercise was a device to avoid tax. So now here we know what the issue is. We have understood that the assessing officer has made an addition by disallowing the loss. So the assessee has suffered that disallowance and has gone in appeal. And also by reading the top part of it, we have understood that he has also lost before the CIT appeal. So he's in the tribunal. Next, keep scrolling. Okay. So he has made an addition of 4.20 crore on account of disallowance of short-term capital loss. 2.3 next, Sneha. Learned CIT appeal was, now what CIT appeal has done? CIT appeal was of the opinion that evidence furnished by assessee with respect to so-and-so could not be accepted as genuine. So we know that even CIT appeal has rejected, mainly because it has not accepted the evidence furnished by assessee as genuine. So on that ground, they have basically done that. Okay, next. Okay, now in the blue color, what I've done is I have changed the color. This is my own way of doing it, is what the assessee is saying. So what are the facts we have noted above? Now this in blue color, you can change, keep picking up your colors, whatever you want. In this case, I have taken the blue color to know what the assessee is saying. So assessee has argued in his ground of appeal, he has said, and this is the issue which I have taken. He says that the orders are bad in law as admitted from para 3 of assessment here. The case was primarily selected for limited scrutiny only on limited issue of long-term capital gain, on which there remains no addition, and conversion of limited scrutiny to complete scrutiny on mere suspicion only for verification is invalid approval of PCIT 3. So what we till now read was that this is a case of disallowance of long-term capital loss on the ground that it is bogus or sham. But very surprisingly, when we come to the issue, we realize that the issue before the tribunal is slightly different. It is not about only loss. Okay, that is also an issue. But first, the issue is whether the conversion from limited scrutiny to complete scrutiny was a valid exercise done by the department on the basis of law. So this is a very interesting plea raised by the assessee before the tribunal in this case, whether that conversion itself was valid. Reason being that limited scrutiny was to check the capital gain. And on capital gain part, no adverse inference has been drawn. So why is that the case has been converted to complete scrutiny to check the capital loss, which was never the question before the AO to start with when the scrutiny was taken. So very interesting issue raised. And this is the issue which he has explained further, the assessee has explained further as we go ahead. I'm skipping this so just to teach you that, so much of the material becomes irrelevant. Okay. Now, if you see para 4, it's like it places the assessee's arguments. It says the case was selected for limited scrutiny on the limited issue of long-term capital gain, and it was converted to complete scrutiny only on mere suspicion and for the purpose of verification only. On the basis of an invalid approval by Principal Commissioner of Income Tax, it was submitted that the conversion from limited to complete scrutiny was not as per the instructions issued by CBDT, and I have underlined it, instruction number 19 and 20 dated so and so, and therefore the entire assessment was void ab initio. Now, why I'm highlighting this is, first of all, this is an argument of the assessee, as we said that the parts of the judgment. So this is that part of the judgment where the assessee is raising an argument. And assessee is relying on a particular circular. So I have highlighted that circular because he's relying on a particular provision of law, source of law. As we discussed that there are statutory sections, then there are circulars and notifications, and then there are case laws. So here he has cited a particular instruction to buttress his point, to enforce his point that this conversion from limited to complete scrutiny is invalid. And he's relying on this. This is an argument. Right now, we are not on what judge is saying. We are right now only reading what the parties are saying. Okay, next point. Next, Sneha. Okay. The learned authorized representative also drew our attention to the computation of income by assessee and submitted So it was evident from computation that nowhere was the detail of the loss incurred in shares disclosed company wise. So he says कहीं पे कुछ disclosure था ही नहीं company wise का, तो how did he know that this is bogus? To know that it is bogus, he should have had first hand information that these losses are emerging out of certain company shares, and only then he could have converted it. But in this case, there was no such breakup available. Then where did he get this information or this suspicion that this is bogus? Next, scroll please. And then he says department had converted the limited scrutiny into complete scrutiny only for making roving inquiry. So he's straight away then alleging that this conversion exercise itself is invalid because AO is only doing a roving inquiry without having any concrete material in his hand that this was actually a bogus entry. Then he says CBDT instructions, wherein it has been stated that while forming the reasonable view, AO has to ensure that there existed credible material, information available on record for forming such view, and that reasonable view should be based should not be based on mere suspicion or conjecture, and there must be a direct nexus between the material. So here the assessee is arguing that if you see the notification, it says that all these conditions should be fulfilled before you can convert limited scrutiny into complete scrutiny. And in my case, he did not even know which entities I have taken the loss from. So how did he know that these are bogus? Next. In 4.2, he further says that learned AR argued that the proposal and the approval both were completely non-descriptive, as even the basic details required for forming reasonable view were completely missing. So he's relying upon two things: the proposal sent by the AO to the commissioner and the approval granted by commissioner in return for converting limited to complete scrutiny. So he says both were totally non-descriptive, कुछ था ही नहीं उसमें, किस basis पे उन्होंने किया. 4.3 he says some reference of report of investigation wing which the assessee was not confronted with, and further assessee's prayer for granting opportunity of cross examination was also denied. So this is his second point, that okay, on suspicion you did it, then you did not grant me an opportunity, you relied on some investigation wing report which was never provided to me. Next. Now in red, what I've done is I have put the counter of the department. I have deliberately chosen red as a color for the department because it highlights more, and I know that these are the dangerous precedents or dangerous situations which in my cases which I follow, I have to be very careful that I am able to meet these arguments of the department for any precedents in which I rely upon. So I have mentioned in red font on the top department's arguments, and it says the learned senior DR, while referring to contents of proposal dated 5th October 17 and approval dated 10th October submitted, there was nothing wrong with them, and they satisfied the conditions as per CBDT instruction. So he says they were proper. Next. And he says that learned DR also argued that investigation wing is a part of department itself and not a third party. Therefore, AO was completely justifying on relying upon the report. Now, thereafter, from para 6 starts what the judges say. Now, this is the most important part of the entire judgment, now tribunal's finding, that finally tribunal has understood the issue. Issue is regarding conversion of limited scrutiny to into complete scrutiny. Challenged by the assessee, he has given his reasoning relying upon CBDT circular. Department is denying it, saying no, the proposal and approval are all correct as per the CB instruction. Now, tribunal is going through the material and saying. So as I explained, when I just stay at para 6, please. Yeah. So as I was explaining while the first part of the this seminar, that it always starts with certain words. So if you see para 6 ka first line, it says we have heard the rival submissions and have also perused the material on record. Now, the moment you hit these lines, you will immediately know that from here the reasoning starts, the judgment starts, real judgment starts. Upar tak sab facts or arguments se ab ye real part start hua judgment ka. Then it further says, after considering the entire factual matrix, we first deal with the primary argument of DR that conversion of case from limited scrutiny was not legally valid. Now they have culled out the issue. So this is the question before the court. The question before court is not, in this case, whether 4.2 crore loss was genuine or bogus. The question in this judgment before the court is whether the conversion of scrutiny from limited to complete was a valid exercise by department. So you cannot use this judgment as a precedence to put forth your argument that udhar 4.2 crore allow kar diya tha, to idhar bhi hona chahiye long term loss allow. No, it is not dealing with that issue. So be very careful what the question was. And here I am just recapitulating what Supreme Court said in Sun Engineering, that the court only answers that question which is placed before it. So the question here is regarding conversion of complete to limited to complete, and not about the genuineness of 4.2 crores. So we will restrict our understanding of this judgment on that question itself. So tribunal is giving a finding. It is, I have highlighted, it is relying upon CBDT instruction number 5/2016. It is reproducing that particular part, and it is saying, after reproducing, keep scrolling, Sneha. Yeah, so it says para 3 is important, and it's the law relied upon. It says, further, while forming the reasonable view, AO would ensure that there exists credible material or information on record for forming such view. Reasonable view should not be based on mere suspicion, conjecture, or unreliable source, and there must be direct nexus between available material and formation of such view. So this is emanating out from CBDT circular. So tribunal is relying upon this particular source of law, that okay, this is what is mentioned or provided to us. Then then further I have written, the CBDT circular further says, which the tribunal is relying upon, to prevent possibility of fishing and roving inquiries in such cases, it is desirable that these cases should invariably be picked up while conducting review inspection by so and so. So the objective of conversion from or to lay down the safeguards as given in the earlier para number 5 is only so as to ensure that there is no fishing and roving inquiry, and easily a limited scrutiny is not converted into complete scrutiny. So tribunal is relying upon these various parts of it. Next. Okay. Then the tribunal has further reproduced another circular instruction, which is instruction number 20/2015, which talks about scrutiny assessments and some important aspects. It has reproduced that instruction. Yes, Neha. Please scroll. And from that particular, I have highlighted this, that the assessing officer shall issue an appropriate show cause notice indicating the reasons for proposed addition along with necessary evidence, reasons forming the basis. Before passing the final order, the due consideration shall be given to submission made by assessee in response to show cause notice. So the tribunal is relying upon this particular circular, and I have, while reading, picked out this important safeguard which has been provided in the CBDT circular. Then in green, I have written the findings of the, I have highlighted the findings of the tribunal. So I have mentioned in red font a rule. So here a rule or the law has been laid down by the tribunal. It says, a perusal of the aforesaid instructions would show that the objective behind the issuance of these instructions is to prevent possibility of fishing and roving inquiry, ensure maximum objectivity, and to enforce checks and balances upon powers of AO. Now what you have to understand is that this has a precedential value. This is where you can cite it as a precedence. Anywhere you rely upon such instruction in any of your case, you can rely on this judgment. You can reproduce this part to the judge and say, in this particular case, the tribunal has held that the instructions have so and so nature, and this is the objective which the tribunal, Delhi tribunal, has found favor with. So that's why I've written rule. This is a very important part of this judgment. Then the tribunal says, we have gone through the proposal drafted by AO. So what they have done, they have gone through two circulars and instructions. Then they have gone through the proposal drafted by the AO. Yeah, please proceed. Yeah, they have reproduced it, and they have said, this transaction, this is the proposal, language of the proposal of AO. Tribunal has merely reproduced it. The proposal says, this transaction appears to be suspicious in nature and probably this loss has been created to reduce so and so. I have highlighted these words. The judges have not, but in my reading, I have highlighted that this is a relevant fact. Why I have written relevant fact? One, because there are more than one relevant facts. So this is a very relevant fact that the AO, while sending the proposal, has raised a suspicion and he's not sure. He says probably it has been created. So this kind of language and proposal matches with the instruction where they say you cannot make roving and fishing inquiry or on suspicion. You have to have credible information. Now, this proposal which the tribunal has reproduced is clearly violating that instruction. As we go ahead, we will realize. So that's why I highlighted that this becomes a very relevant fact. So when you are reading, say, after having read this judgment, if you want to apply to your set of facts, you have to read the proposal there in your case, whether similar language is used. The second thing which the tribunal relies upon in para 6.4 is the original order sheet entries. And it says there is not an iota of any cogent material mentioned by the AO which enabled him to reach the conclusion that this was a fit case for conversion. I have mentioned two before it. Why? Because it is a relevant fact too. It is a fact that from the order sheet entry, there is no material mentioned, cogent material. So these are very relevant facts. Then the third, he says, statement of SSC's director was recorded, and in his statement, nothing adverse is coming out vis-a-vis the impugned transaction. So this is a third relevant fact. So these three relevant facts the court has observed by going through the material. And then they come through the reasoning and their ratio. That is where they say, no reasonable view is formed as mandated in the CBDT instruction number 5 in an objective manner. And secondly, mere suspicion and inference is the foundation of the view of the officer. No direct nexus brought on record by the AO in the said proposal. Therefore, it is very much apparent that proposal of converting limited to complete was merely aimed at making fishing inquiries. Now, this is the entire reasoning they have given after putting three relevant facts, relying on material on record, like proposals, the order sheet entries, the notification circulars, everything. Next. Now, this is basically the precedence, the past precedence which has been relied by the tribunal. I have put it in another color just for my future reference. So the court further says that the Calcutta High Court in the case of Amal Kumar Ghosh in 361 ITR discussed the purpose behind CBDT circulars. So they are justifying, the tribunal is justifying why they are relying on CBDT circular. They are giving the precedence. So I've just highlighted, I'm not reading it in detail because that's just law. This is just to explain the various parts of the judgment. Next, scroll. Then they are relying upon Chandigarh IT80 bench and has held that even 292 BB cannot cure these kind of activities. Then 6.7, again I put it in green color. This is the finding of the court. And the court has found it to be in total violation of CBDT instruction number. So accordingly, it is a considered opinion that the entire assessment do not have any feet to stand on. Now, this is the decision. Now, this is the final verdict, and the reasoning has already been explained above as ratio by taking three relevant facts. So these are the various parts. Now, in this entire judgment, this is not important that it has been found as that this is violative. What is important is the why part of it, which we just went through, which says why it is violative of the CBDT circular, because the proposal was not properly worded. There was no iota of material in this. Then the CBDT circular refrained the assessing officer from doing such kind of activities. So those reasons are important and they become binding precedents for future. Yes, yeah. And so the final result, SSC's appeal stands alone. So this is one judgment of Delhi IT80 which I have covered as a case study, and I believe that most of you would have understood some part of it, that as to how this is being, how the judgment is read and what is the most important of the soul of the judgment. So in this case, I believe that now most of you have understood that the soul of this particular judgment is the reasoning given by the tribunal saying that the CBDT instruction number 5/2016 lay down that on suspicion it cannot be done. In this case, on verifying this material, the relevant facts, it is very clear that it has violated this circular. Therefore, this entire assessment is quashed. And I am repeating by saying that this judgment has not dealt with the primary issue of whether the 4.2 crore was genuine or bogus. It has restricted itself for the issue before it regarding whether the conversion of scrutiny from limited to this thing is valid or not. So this is how you read a judgment and distinguish between what is the question, what is the ratio. And I will not be surprised if somebody has circulated that judgment on the ground saying that the loss, capital loss, has been allowed by the tribunal. If you read the judgment, the tribunal has not made any comment or any verdict on the genuineness or the bogus, or whether it is bogus or not. it is merely saying that this scrutiny conversion procedure was not proper. So be very careful what is the question, what is decided, and how we report it and read it. Now, if at this stage, if anybody has any questions, you can take it. I think the session is till 12:30, I believe. So it's 11:55. We still have time. I can take you through this judgment, and I would love to take you through this judgment because this is a very, very recent judgment of January 21, and it is laying down a binding precedence for all over the country. So, and it's just a 9-page order, but it's very important. And it's also throwing out certain new issues which we have not seen in the earlier judgment. But in the meantime, here, if somebody wishes to ask anything, and also I can catch up a few breaths before I can start on this. So any queries or anything, or if you want to say whether I'm going too fast or too slow, or I need to explain some part, please let me know so that I'll try to cover it in next 5, 7, 10 minutes. Okay, so I'll go ahead with this if there are no further queries on this. Now, 1 second. So please share the judgments. Sure, I'll share the judgments. I will share the PPT also. I'll mail it to the concerned persons, and that could give you some idea as to how you have to mark the mark it when you are reading it. How do you mark judgment? Okay. So we go ahead with this particular judgment. Now, this is, as I said, Mumbai ITAT judgment. Thank you, Naveen. Thank you for the encouragement. Okay, now this is the Mumbai ITAT judgment, as we said, and as I told you, it's by Shri Pramod Kumar, Vice President, one of my favorite judges for the way he writes. Very beautiful English. The thoughts are so lucid and clear, and he deals with a lot of jurisprudence which goes beyond the statutory sections and the rules laid down by the by the legislature. It goes beyond the this thing, and the judgments which he cite invariably become a binding precedents for the country to follow. This is one such judgment. The issue here is very interesting, very recent, and some very interesting remark in the last paragraph, rather funny also, which we'll come to when we come to the last paragraph. Okay, now this is again assessee's appeal. So that means the assessee, as usual, has lost before the CIT appeal as well and come to tribunal. Now, if you see something interesting here, if you see the part appearances by, now it says none for the appellant. So this is a case where no one appeared for the assessee, although it is an assessee's appeal, and only the department appeared. However, this particular judge, I mean, full kudos to him that he still took up this issue and without any counter arguments from the assessee side. So there will not be any part of assessee's argument or appellant's argument. That part will be missing in this judgment. Still, he has thrashed out the law behind this particular issue so beautifully that you will understand how law is read, how sections are read, how judges think, and what is tax jurisprudence all about. Very, very favorite judgment of mine. Okay, now this is, as you said, that this date of concluding the hearing was January 14th, and the date of pronouncement was the very next day, January 15, 2021. So this is just before the second wave broke out, and this has been done. I think it was through virtual hearing only. Now, if you see the issue, if you read para 3, it says, when this appeal was called out for hearing, it was noticed that the variation in the sale consideration as disclosed by assessee vis-a-vis valuation adopted by stamp duty valuation is only 6.55%. And it was put to learned DR as to why the assessee not be allowed the benefit of third proviso to section 50C1, as the variation is much less than the prescribed permissible variation of up to 10%. So the issue here was that, as we all know, under section 50, that the sale consideration should be equal to the ready reckoner value. And due to COVID, somewhere in March, April 2020, I believe, an amendment was made in the act and which permitted that up to 10% tolerance limit was given to the variation. So if you have sold any property within the 10% tolerance limit of the sale consideration, and if it matches with that 10%, if it matches the stamp duty valuation, then no addition can be made under section 50C. I believe we all are aware of that particular amendment which came in 2020, and also the law behind section 50C. So this was a case, this was a very interesting case where it was, the issue was that here this appeal was filed that there was a difference of 6.55%. However, if you see para 1 towards the end, it says this is assessment year 11-12. So the issue which was raised here was that although the amendment, the third proviso, came in 2020, would it apply to transactions done in 2011-12? So would it also have a retrospective effect, so that you can say that in 2011-12, though this 10% tolerance was not there, but since it has come today, I am entitled to this benefit? Yes, absolutely. First it was 5%, then it became 10%. And very well said, because this has been captured by this judgment, that amendment of 5% and then 10%. Very well said. So this was the entire issue. Now the issue before the tribunal was, and this is the issue which was culled out by the tribunal, that they asked the department that why are you not giving him the benefit of that 10%, since the variation is only 6.55%. Let's see what happens. So this is the issue before the court. Next. So here they say that, as someone has rightly put on the text box also, that by virtue of Finance Act 2018, only with effect from 1st April 2019, variation of 5% was enacted. And then with effect from 1st April 21, that is AY 21-22, so financial year 2021 onwards, it was increased to 10%. Now the question is whether it applies to 2011-12, because these amendments came in these two periods. Next. Sneha, please scroll. Yeah. Okay. So what was the fact in this case? That the SSC sold her flat bearing so and so for a consideration of rupees 75 lakhs, even though the valuation was 79,91,000. So capital gain was calculated at 75 lakh, assessment was made at 79,91, and difference was added. So these are pure simple facts. There is nothing complicated in the fact. Difference of 9,91,500. Sorry, 4,91,500. So in para 5, what the judges have done, they have laid down the legislative history, that how this evolved, this particular provision evolved. Sneha, can please scroll. So they have just said that 5% ka baya, ye ka baya, 10% ka baya. You can keep scrolling. So they have, in this paragraph, they have given the history of this thing. Keep scrolling, yeah. Oh, this is just reproduction. Now this is where Slayer, just can you just reverse, go to the beginning of this para 6. Yeah. Now para 6 talks about the submission which was made by the departmental representative. Since there was no assessee's representative, only the department made its counter submission, and very interestingly, he made written submissions. So if you see para 6, it says the relevant submissions in his written note are as follows. So he filed a written submission. In written submission, he has basically just mentioned the legislative history, why it came and all that. Yeah, Sneha, please scroll. Then he has relied upon sub number 8 of 2018. So I have written relevant material or relevant fact, which he has relied upon. Keep scrolling. Then in para 16.3 of that particular circular, it is mentioned, in order to minimize hardship in the case of genuine transaction in the real estate sector, section 43CA, section 50C, and section 56 have been amended, so that 10% tolerance limit has come. What was the objective of the legislature is mentioned in the circular, which has been mentioned by the DR himself. Okay, next. Now in 16.4, if you see, he says that the amendment takes effect from 1st April 2019 and will accordingly apply to AY 19-20 and subsequent assessment years. So he's saying that this applies to 19-20 and subsequent years. So this case is 11-12. Logically, this amendment should not apply to 11-12 assessment year, which is in appeal. So this is a submission which the department is making. Yeah, continue scrolling, Stan. Okay, then he mentions that representations have been received in this regard, requesting that the set safe harbor of 5% may be increased. it is therefore proposed to increase the limit to 10%. This is from the explanatory memorandum he has reproduced. Okay, next. Yeah. In para 7, now this is where the judge is writing his order. Now this is the reasoning, ratio. The most important part starts from here. The first line itself will catch your eye. He says, these submissions, however, do not impress us. The moment you read this, oh, great. You know that the judges have decided against the department and they've held that this amendment applies to even AY 11-12, this 10% tolerance limit. You know this. Now let us see how he has justified, even though when the legislature has clearly stated that this amendment applies from AY 19-20 or whatever, still the tribunal has gone ahead and held no, it applies retrospectively. Now, to decide a case against the specific wordings of statute is not an easy task. And here comes the reasoning and the quality of judgment and the conviction of the judge when he's writing the order, which will become that binding precedence for all your cases in future. And you know how to read such provisions and such safe harbor provisions which come under law. So what he says is relevant fact, which I have highlighted in yellow. He says once the CBDT itself accepts that these variations could be on account of a variety of factors, especially bona fide factors. And for this reason, section 50C1 should not come into play. It was an unintended consequence of section 50 subsection 1 that even in such bona fide situations, this provision, which is inherently in the nature of an anti-avoidance provision, is invoked. So he's very clearly highlighting that CBDT accepts that even in bona fide cases, unfortunately, this issue is getting raised of making additions of variation. So this is the first observation, very relevant observation of the judge. Next. Okay. Then he says, then he has enlarged the issue. He says, the question that we must take a call on. Now, the moment he says the question we take a call on, it should strike you that this is the issue which he's deciding. When I say that issue is the most important part of it on which the reasoning is based. So here he's penning down or he's zeroing on to the issue. He says, the question that we must take a call on therefore is, to what is the rationale behind the insertion of third proviso? And if that rationale is to provide a remedy for unintended consequence of the main provision, we must hold that section 50C1 comes into force with effect from the same date on which the main provision sought to be nullified itself was brought into effect. Now, this is really an interesting rule he's laying down. He says, if some amendment was brought in to remove any unintended consequence of a section, then that amendment will relate back to the time when that section itself was introduced. So since that section was introduced in 2003, this amendment, though made in 2019-20, will relate back to 2003 and it will be applicable to all the years from there because it was done to remove an unintended consequence. To reach this situation of enlarging the issue which I have written, or to reach at this level of conviction, he has not done it on his own. He has relied upon the judicial pronouncements which has been mentioned above by him in bold, if you see, and he has highlighted it. I have not gone in there because that will become too technical. My job here is not to teach this judgment, but to tell you the various parts of the judgment. So when I'm saying that this is an important part, what you take away from this judgment is the reasoning. So the reasoning is, if an amendment, this is the law, the jurisprudence forever, in your mind, it should get stuck on reading this judgment, that whenever an amendment is brought to remove an unintended consequence, it is always retrospective to the date when that provision was introduced, and it is not from a particular date. That is very logical also because it will create two classes of assessees, one who's benefiting from that amendment, one who's not benefiting from that provision, which cannot be the objective of the law. Ultimately, the law wants everybody to be on the same pedestal. So this is very interesting jurisprudence he has laid down, ignoring the legal words to that. Yes. Okay. Then I have given, he has further explained it, the reasoning. Unless, therefore, some kind of tolerance band or a safe harbor provision in respect of such bona fide variation is implicit in the scheme of law, assessee are bound to face undue hardships. The insertion of third proviso provides for this tolerance band with respect to certain degree of variation between stamp duty and stated consideration of immovable property. CBDT itself accepts that there could be various bona fide reasons explaining the small variations between so and so for the said immovable property. So he's explaining the reasons that, okay, this is the reason why this amendment is coming, to provide safe harbor and all. Yes, the objective of the amendment coming in. Please proceed, Shreya. Please scroll. Then he says, there is no particular reason to justify any particular time frame from implementing the enhancement. Shreya, please scroll. Enhancement of tolerance band also. So he says, why should there be a time frame? If something has come to remove any ambiguity or to remove any unjustified intent, then that has to apply from the earlier date. There cannot be any time limit provided to it. It will apply only from so and so date. So then he says there is no variation in the material facts in respect of in 2021 vis-a-vis material facts in 2003. What holds good in 2021 also good in 2003. If variation up to 10% need to be tolerated and need not be probed further under section 50C in 2021, there were no good reasons to probe such variation in the earlier period as well. Beautifully written, very well explained. Then he says this amendment is curative in nature, and therefore these provisions, even though stated to be prospective, must be held to relate back to the date when related statutory provision of 50C, that is 1st April 2003. This is the ratio which he has laid down, and I have mentioned ratio decision. It says these amendments are thus held to be retrospective in effect. In our considered view, therefore, the provision of third proviso as they stand now must be held to be effective from 2003. We order accordingly. Now, I would have normally stopped here, and the judge would have normally stopped here and passed an order. Now, something very interesting happened after this. Let's read what happened. The next line, it says, learned DR, however, does not give up. I found this sentence funny, but anyway, full marks to the learned departmental representative. He says, learned departmental representative has suggested that we mention in our order that relief is being provided as a special case and this decision should not be considered as a precedent. Now, this is where the precedential value comes in. And this is where what this particular judge writes is so interesting. He says, nothing can be farther from a judicious approach to the process of dispensation of justice. And such an approach as is prayed for is antithesis to the principle of equality before law, which is one of our most cherished constitutional values. Our judicial functioning has to be even-handed, transparent, predictable. And what we have decided for one litigant must hold good for all other similarly placed litigants as well. We therefore decline to entertain this plea of either SSC लिख दिया गलती से, should be department. So what they are saying is that you cannot apply this. This is a precedent. They have said that this has a precedential value. Now, this is a judgment which, irrespective of whatever the facts of your case is, if your case is of any year and it is tolerated, the tolerance band is within 10%, then no addition can be made, irrespective of the year. So that is why this has such a binding precedence. That is why the department was arguing it, make it only specific to this case. They said no, it is the law laid down by this particular tribunal, Mumbai tribunal. The effect of this is that under the Mumbai jurisdiction, whatever orders have been passed making additions under section 50C, even in the past, if 10%, if they are within 10%, then this judgment gives them full relief. And that is what this judgment does. It lays down a very binding precedence, plus it gives a lot of law on it, gives the complete reasoning why it is done, because the amendment is of a particular nature, that is curative in nature, to remove an anomaly, to give relief to the SSC. Therefore, it is to be read retrospectively. And yeah, you can scroll there. So finally, they say in the result, appeal is allowed in the terms of India pronounced in so and so. So this judgment, when you read, you know that this is something which you can circulate on WhatsApp very easily, saying in 3 lines that all cases of 50C where the addition is within 10% is now can easily claim relief, citing this judgment. This is a fit case for a WhatsApp circulation, but the first one we read wasn't. So this is the distinction we have to make when we are reading a judgment. Since this session was for explaining the entire thing, and since this was the idea behind was to teach you various parts. I've taken so much time in reading it. However, given to me now after 23 years of practice, a 9-page order takes me not less than 3 to 4 minutes in understanding and culling out the proposition, which you too can read and learn in another 21 days. Just keep practicing. That's the only thing. Okay, so there are certain queries we can. I'll hand it over to the organizers so that in whatever manner they want to take the queries, they can take. I'll try and address them.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Bharatji. I go through the queries.
Jitendra bhai, your face is not visible.
Sorry.
So tilt your camera. Yeah.
So
Should I take it?
one second. So Mr. Vaibhav Joshi is asking, can order of the Mumbai tribunal is applied to the other tribunal because
See, I'll tell you that the judgments of a tribunal are binding within the jurisdiction of that particular tribunal. However, my personal experience is that they definitely have a huge persuasive value, although not binding. So just taking an example of the last judgment which we just went through of Mumbai ITAT, now they have laid down that particular issue is an all India issue. It's not something very specific to certain this thing, and it's they have very clearly said that it has a precedential value. So I would personally believe that most of the tribunals would prefer following it rather than distinguishing it. However, legally speaking, it's not binding.
okay? I don't see much queries.
Could you tell us the hierarchy on what they usually follow, the jurisdictional ITAT or the concerned ITAT, also high courts, special bench? Yeah.
Yeah, so what happens is, as a precedential value, Supreme Court has a precedential value over the entire country. The high courts have a precedence over the state of which they are. So Bombay High Court judgment may or may not be followed by Gujarat High Court and vice versa. But Bombay High Court judgment has to be mandatorily followed by the Bombay Tribunal, Mumbai Tribunal, or the Pune Tribunal, or whatever, the state tribunals. Then when we come to the tribunal, the tribunal's jurisdiction is further limited to the area in which it is operating. So Mumbai Tribunal judgment is not binding on Pune ITAT. Same way, Pune ITAT is not. So this is how it works. My personal experience is that AOs give no credence to the tribunal judgments. And if they give credence to Bombay High Court judgments, I really consider them to be good AOs. So, we have to learn to live with it. But I think the moment we reach any appellate forum, a Bombay tribunal becomes a very seriously binding judgment, and which is definitely followed.
And special bench judgments?
Definitely. So special bench judgments has a binding precedence over a division bench or an SMC because they are considered to be of a higher strength once a special bench is constituted. Again, it's a very gray area whether a special bench decision will prevail over all the other tribunal benches all over the country. Because ultimately, when a special bench is constituted on a particular issue, it's constituted in a particular place. So, but my personal experience has been that once there is a special bench decision, the other tribunals tend to follow it without distinguishing it. For the simple reason, not because of a jurisdictional binding precedence, but because the special bench decision is of a higher strength than a division bench. So a 3-member bench decision cannot be overruled by a 2-member bench. So because of that, there is this thing. But how if tomorrow a 5-member bench is constituted as a special bench, that can overrule a 3-member bench.
Any other questions?
There was one more question by Vivek Agarwal. Can you please guide on how you save all your case laws so that we can easily find them when we need? Like, do you save section wise or topic wise or any other manner?
No, I mean, it's a very good question, but I'll tell you, there is no simple answer to it because nobody has that kind of a database or a memory to be able to fish it. See, what we have done is in our office we have a portal, we have a dedicated portal where we sort the judgments issue wise and topic wise, and we search them as and when the issue arise. But that's a totally an internal database which we have formed. And most of the litigation lawyers or the CAs who practice at the tribunal level have their own internal database where they save it in a manner in which it appeals to them or they are able to fish it out easily. So there is no one way of doing it. And a lot of people do it generally on their laptops or computers, or I have a cloud-based platform portal, so we do it on that. But each one have their own way of doing it. And sometimes what happens is the confusion arises because one judgment may be dealing with a number of issues. Say, let's take an example of reopening of assessment under section 148. So now, suppose there is a Bombay High Court judgment which has quashed a notice under 148 on the ground of either saying that it is not valid jurisdiction, or it may have saying that it's beyond 4 years reopening without the default of SSC, or they could also be dealing with that the reasons recorded are incorrect, factually incorrect, or they are not proper. So how do you, under which head you save it? So it becomes tend to become a little difficult. So my way of working is, though I save them as far as possible in a very proper organized manner, but still a lot depends upon my own memory. So that, I know that, okay, if it relates to borrowed satisfaction of AO while recording 148, then there is some judgment of Meenakshi overseas of Delhi High Court. So there is that somewhat connect. It's not totally zero, it's not totally there. Then based upon that, I'll go to my portal and I'll search, Meenakshi overseas ka judgment kahan hai? I'll get it, then okay, mil gaya. But there has to be some connects. And that connect comes in from reading the judgments in this manner. Like today, we discussed this judgment of 50C of Bombay Tribunal. I can bet on you, whoever has attended this diligently today, that judgment at least, even if 2 months later you ask them 50C में जो amendment हुआ है वो retrospective है, prospective है, they will say there is a Mumbai IT80 judgment, I know वो है. You will never forget it. That is the classic thing about the human brain, that the moment you read a judgment with total passion and to really grasp it, it will always remain in the I will say the database of your brain rather than on your computer, which will come out at the time when it's needed most. Otherwise you may not remember. बट किसी ने कोई उंगली रखी, वो स्ट्रेट करके स्कैन करके जजमेंट थ्रो कर देगा आपकी टांग पे कि ये जजमेंट था, वो उस दिन सुना था. देन यू विल सर्च इट. हाँ, कोई मुंबई IT80 का है, वो प्रमोद कुमार का है, निकालते हैं, तो देन यू विल फाइंड इट ऑन गूगल, यू विल फाइंड इट एल्सवेयर. सो नोइंग द कॉन्सेप्ट एंड नोइंग दैट देयर इज अ जजमेंट इज इंपॉर्टेंट. वो मिल ही जाता है. आजकल सर्च इंजिन इतने अच्छे हैं कि यू डोंट नीड टू स्टोर देम एनीवेयर. यू हैव टैक्स मैनेजमेंट इंडिया, यू हैव टैक्समैन, आपको बस थोड़ा बहुत डालना है कि हाँ ऐसा कुछ था, वो आ जाएगा. So don't really worry about storing it in the computer or anything. Try to store as much concepts as possible in your mind. The concepts are more important.
Or you can use some software also, like CTR Encyclopedia or some TaxMan.
Yes, yeah. So all these, yeah, but all these, if you realize, the starting point is that you probably know that there is a judgment existing and you are searching for it. So that knowing thing is important. You can't start totally from a blank because you don't know what ground to take. But if you know that, okay, you've read something, कुछ concept सुना था कि वो retrospective है, तो then you will put in the words like retrospective applicability of 50C third proviso, Mumbai IT80. That is how you will search and then it will throw up.
Keywords.
तो कुछ तो keywords तो मालूम होने चाहिए ना, वो तो memory से ही आएगा.
Okay, just 2 or 3 queries. What happens if the AO does not follow binding judgments?
I think, see, it's very simple. I'll address it. It's a very interesting question and which is happening nowadays quite a lot. So what happens is that there is an appellate remedy. You can go in appellate remedy. Normally the clients say where the huge high-pitched additions are made by not following binding precedents. The clients say कि सर अगर अब उसने एडिशन कर दिया, ठीक है, हमारा appellate remedy है, but हमें 20% तो पे करना पड़ेगा अपील के लिए as per the CBDT circular. So we are adversely affected. So what has happened is over last couple of years, there is a very strong tendency among the lawyers fraternity जहाँ पे totally ignore करके judgments pass किए गए हैं या proper opportunity नहीं मिला है not to go straight to the writ in the high court instead apart from going in appeal. And two prayers are usually taken. One is obviously saying that this is violative of principle, so you quash this judgment and order and all that. Normally, High Court doesn't interfere there, but court grants two reliefs which otherwise are not there. One, it says that this appeal should be disposed of within 3 months. Normally, in our cases, that is the relief we have got. ये टाइम लिमिट कर देती है, सीआईटी अपील को बाइंडिंग कर देती है कि 3 महीने में डिस्पोजल करना है आपको. सेकंड वो कर देता है कि स्टे दे देता है डिमांड में से. So 20% का भी डिमांड पे नहीं करना पड़ता. वो बोलता है कि 3 months and you don't have unconditional stay is granted for 3 months till this is decided by the CIT appeal. And वो रिलीफ भी मिला तो then SSC is relaxed कि चलो ऑर्डर हुआ भी अगेंस्ट में तो भी जल्दी रिलीफ मिलेगा CIT अपील से और डिमांड नहीं प्रेस होएगा. So you know somewhere कुछ ना कुछ मिल जाता है उस तरीके से. But you are right, this is a problem. You can't really do anything about it. AOs have a job to do, so that's okay.
Next query is from Vallabh Joshi. How can one keep track of new judgments? We can go ITAT online or something. We can.
Yeah, so see what happens is what I have is I have a subscription to Taxman where on a regular basis, or daily basis, they send me emails. I have a subscription to Lexis where they send me emails every day. So what happens is what I have done, I'll tell you on a technology part, I have a Gmail ID where there is an option of creating a separate folder based upon certain words. I mean, that you can go on Google and it will explain you. Once you classify certain mails coming from certain people, it automatically goes in that particular inbox. So I have named it as subscriptions. So what happens is all the mails which come of the recent judgments, mentioning recent judgments with the link, they keep getting accumulated there. As and when I get time, I keep reading them and disposing them off. So what happens is they get sorted out on my Gmail box in a subscription folder, and it allows me, I'm traveling, I'm here, there, watching TV, something boring, you know, whatever, or I'm sitting with a client who's, I'm not able to, you know, really want to spend time with him, but sunna pad raha hai, so I keep at that time reading judgments without he knowing. So, you know, you keep yourself busy that way, and that way you are informed in short. And then whatever judgment I find useful, that, oh, this is interesting judgment, out of 10 judgments, something interesting, I'll forward that link to Sneha, who's handling this portal. So I forward that to Sneha. She takes out the entire judgment, sends me the PDF, I read it on my iPad, I mark it this way, and then I put it in my database. Otherwise, just read it and finish it off. So that's how you can do it. But as I said, it's all about passion of law. You know, I mean, these things are not easily doable because most people feel, yaar, itna padna padta hai kya? It's a matter of habit and it's a matter of passion, nothing else.
So last question we have from Naveen Khariwal. Any recent landmark judgment or demonetization additions?
See, on demonetization additions, so there are plethora of judgments and plethora of litigation. I am nobody much to say on this. Rather, I'm sure you must be listening to Mr. Kapil Goyal on YouTube. He has some very dedicated lectures on the same thing, on demonetization, on 148 due to no demonetization, scrutiny, additions under section 68, 115. So if you listen to him, he gives a whole lot of presidential judgments as to which is applicable, why it's applicable. Very, very good material. And I never miss his webinars at all. Even if I miss, I make it a point to watch it on YouTube. Also, while watching it on YouTube later on, we have an added advantage that you can even skip certain portions or you can listen to it at a faster speed. So, you know, I normally tend to go to the settings and make it 1.5. And even while taking a walk, going for a morning walk, I just play it on, I put it on my this thing mobile and I just listening to whatever he's saying. वो सुनते रहते हैं तो भी बहुत ज्ञान मिल जाता है. And मतलब आजकल ये बहुत बड़ा benefit है जो हमारे टाइम में नहीं था. That खुद ज्ञानी लोग आपके घर पे चल के आते हैं तो वो make use of it. And from that judgment, so many times that YouTube webinars, we make our own synopsis, we save it for future reference that, okay, usme ye judgment bola tha, ye tha. So we make our own synopsis of judgments on that basis. So it's creating a database.
We also had a seminar on demonetization by M.R. Sahu sir. from Delhi.
Okay.
So the person can refer that also if he on the
I-
that's hosted on the AOSE Andheri Oshiwara YouTube channel.
Oh, very
you
good.
can-
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah,
it, I
yeah.
think. Jiten bhai, over to you.
Yeah. Good afternoon to all the participant members and our speaker, Advocate Chartered Accountant Bharat Agrawalji. Today we learn in detail on the topic how to read and analysis judgment under income tax and GST with the practical case study from Advocate and CA Bharat Agrawalji. As we all know, sometime reading and analysis of judgment is a cumbersome exercise. Bharatji explained this in very simple manner and explained some of the legal terms and the Latin words meaning also with practical judgment cases, and his advice to reading and analyze any two judgment for the at least 7 days, we will be better in the position in the 8th day. And if we follow this for 21 days, definitely we learn the how to read and the analysis the judgment. As the judgment is the answer and is an answer or decision of a question raised, and the reasoning for the arriving this decision is very important. So the reasoning is arrived to decision is more important to cases, and judgment is must be read as a whole. We wish that our association with him in future webinar also. ICA Jitendra Kothari, Deputy Convener, give heartiest vote of thanks on behalf of Andheri Oshiwara Study Circle of WRC to our speaker, Advocate Chartered Accountant Bharat Agrawalji for sharing his depth, knowledge and experience with the participant. Thank you, Bharatji.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you
Thank
very
you.
much, sir.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
We have
you.
got
Members,
very good
please
feedback
note
even
that
on the
our
chat and
next
Sorry.
webinar, 15th virtual webinar will be held on the 11th of July, 10:30 on the topic applicability of the accounting standard on the non-company entities and the common error in AS by CA Chintan Patel from Ahmedabad will be speaker of the topic. I request all the members to join in the large number for the success of the program. Now, thank you, Bharatji.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you.
Now